Good evening, welcome, and thank you for joining us for our December school board meeting. We did start at 6 o'clock, so the meeting actually is in session. At this point, I would like to ask for approval of the minutes from our regular meeting in November, and also we had a special meeting in November.
I move we approve the minutes from the regular and the special meeting.
Second.
Any discussion on those minutes? All in favor of approving them?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Next, I need approval of the agenda with one addition. There is an additional donation from Mike Moe of $500 to Prairie, as well as the one that we saw in our board book that he did for Heritage. With that addition, I need approval of the agenda.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. At this time, I would welcome anybody in the public that would like to speak to the board to come forward. And you may make comments on any items. They do not have to necessarily be on the agenda. 4 times a year, we allow the public to come forward and speak to us on any items, and tonight is one of those. So if anybody in the public would like to speak, you may. If not, know that you have that opportunity. Every month you can make comments on the agenda items, and 4 times a year you can make comments on any item. So thank you. Moving on to reports, starting with our student report. Welcome, Anna. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Of course, thank you for having me. All right, so I have some sheets just about what I'm going to talk about, but I'm a few short. So
That's okay, we can share, we don't mind.
All right, so I'll just pass it through this way.
You can, I'll share with Andy. Here, you should.
Yeah, thanks.
No, we have enough.
All right,
All right,
so
Anna.
you may not recognize me because I've been gone past several meetings because I've been in driver's ed, but luckily I'm done with that, and Sean has been taking over. And unfortunately tonight he will be unable to join us due to some conflicts. But I'm just going to talk about like a few things that are pretty important right now in our school, especially with all of the clubs because they're so busy, especially in the holiday season with either charity or parties. And I would first like to talk about Pay It Forward. It's just a charity club, and we all know the Rotary Lights, and students always volunteer every Christmas season or holiday season and just stand around a fire and welcome everybody coming into the Rotary Lights, and it's just really helpful. And besides that, last week they bought and wrapped gifts for children who weren't able to receive gifts from their parents if they didn't have enough money to afford them. And we spent $3,600 on all of that, and it's amazing just how many children we helped. I'm in that club, and it was just an amazing experience. And Student Council, which is another club I'm in, which is why I'm here, is there's a blood drive coming up this January, early January, which we host. And it was really successful. We hosted one in November as well. And it was just a great time. And JDRF is a huge thing going on in Student Council right now. If you don't know what that is, it stands for Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. And it's to help kids with type 1 diabetes. And there are a lot of games, for example, like there's a couple hockey games and basketball games where we raise money and through raffles to donate to the families. And another thing with Student Council was there's a call in ELF last night. I don't know if any of your kids did this, where we were all,
Mine did.
awesome. So we were just in the office and people were calling a specific number, and we picked up and we pretended to be elves for the kids to talk to, and we just asked them, what do you want for Christmas? Like, you're on the naughty list. Good job. Or I mean the nice list. I'm on the nice list. We didn't say that today. We said naughty list. Thank goodness. But it was just super fun, and it was just really exciting to hear all of the kids what they wanted and just like how excited they were. And lastly, there's this thing called the Giving Tree. It was right by the office, and it just had like a little tree with a bunch of ornaments on it with kids who what they wanted for Christmas, and you just took the tag and you bought that specific thing and wrapped it and got it there by yesterday. And besides clubs, there are just winter sports starting, like wrestling and basketball and hockey, and they've been really successful so far. And just lastly, the Warrior logo whereabouts, which I have been asking around a bunch of people, specifically students and some teachers and adults, and mostly the students don't really have much to say about it, just besides the looks of it. Like, they have no opinion on the backstory behind it, and that's basically it about what has been happening this past month.
Awesome.
Wow.
Excellent.
Thank you so much.
What a
Yeah.
busy time at the high
It
school.
has been pretty busy.
Yeah,
It's-
if I can just add something, Anna, about the logo. I mean, when
Yes.
Ms. Ensign and I met with you and Sean this summer, that was one thing we talked to them about was, when you look at our school district, we don't have an official logo. So if you look at all of our letterheads and different activity teams, they're all different. So that's a piece that we want to go through, is really a process to determine what our official logo is, and the kids have been kind of talking about it and giving us some feedback. So that's something that I'll probably catch up with you and Sean at some point so we can touch base on that.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you very much for coming. Next, we have our teacher report from Ashley and Kyle. Thank you for coming this evening.
Thank you for having us.
This is just for me, Joe.
So I guess the most pressing event that we just took place was our recertification of the WTA as the negotiating body for our work group, or our salary group, and we are pleased that we had 91% voter participation and 99% of voters did approve the WTA as that negotiating body. As a related note, just recently the teacher compensation work group has really gotten off the ground, and we really appreciate the fact that you are allowing teachers to work with the district and coming up with a sustainable and dependable salary schedule for everyone.
And then our other big undertaking in November was ratification of our negotiations. I'm happy to say we did vote to ratify that negotiation package. One thing that we have that goes along with that is a meeting where we meet our members and we get feedback from them based off of that. And one theme that kind of came out of that, and it also kind of goes back to the survey we put together last year, was a desire to advocate for us to advocate for any potential shift in negotiations to the springtime. I know that's something we've chatted about before, but it's also something that our members and as well as other teachers who are outside of our membership group have also asked us to advocate for. So I know we have some meetings coming up and maybe we can potentially discuss that. Obviously to work with you to potentially find a way if that's a possibility for us to explore. So that was one theme that came out of that meeting that we just thought we'd share with you. But yes, all ratified and recertified.
Yes.
So
Month of ours.
now December's kind of a calm month for us. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to try to use whatever voice I have left to answer those, or Ashley can take over.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you. The next item in our reports are for board members to report on any activities that you might have attended during the month that you would like to report back to the board on, or events that you attended. Quiet month for everybody.
Busy board meeting.
All right, thank you. Committee reports, starting with facilities. Okay. Facilities.
This month was basically, again, looking a bit at the referendum, but we did go into our capital maintenance with the idea of another short list of items to be added on to last year, of which I think we only have one thing to vote on, which is the maintenance.
We have the energy efficiency projects to do the lighting in this room as a model, and then we also have the pool and the installation of the accessible entry doors at the middle school. So those are two separate agenda items.
Just so you know, the middle school door was that the front entrance to the middle school does not have handicap accessible, so you can't push a button in order to get through. And there was also discussion that the other major entrance that's used by students to get to the high school is over by the gym, and that one also doesn't have a button for the students to be able to get in and out. So at the facilities committee meeting, we voted 3-0 to approve both doors, just because you need both.
Okay, so,
Can I back up for just a
sure,
second?
absolutely.
One of the items that the committee also looked at was they had an update on the stadium planning project. In your packet, you will see the last, the mock-up that the committee brought forward to that the fundraising committee brought forward to the facilities committee as per the request of the board to kind of funnel that through facilities. The board gave some feedback to them with regards to their plan, and they are continuing now to move those things forward as we've approved previously at this level. So you'll see continued iterations of that coming in front of you, and then obviously it'll be a point where you will see some of the costings and the bids of that this spring. And then that'll be an item that we will be having some discussions with. Steve has a parallel item that will go on to the budget committee agenda with regards to some of the different costing options and some of the pieces that may relate to the district's contribution to that. But in your packet as an informational item is just an update from the soccer stadium planning committee.
So we have two items that are in front of us to approve. One is the energy efficient project for Bethel Circle. Any other discussion, anybody? Otherwise, I would entertain a motion.
Option 2, right?
Yes.
Option to approve.
Second.
Okay, second. Any discussion on the project? All in favor?
Aye.
Yeah.
Opposed? Okay, thank you.
If I can just add something, Joan, there's also an attachment in there on the energy savings that the district has received. So if you look at the previous energy efficiency projects that the board has approved, you can see the impacts of those over the last few years. And we're seeing some considerable savings, and with changing out some of our lighting, et cetera, to make it more energy efficient. The work that you just approved for this room will kind of be a model then for the district to see how we move forward with classrooms, et cetera. So you'll start to see some of those live with the room that you're meeting in.
With regard to that, are we simply reallocating those savings into other facility needs, or are we actually pulling them
I'll let Steve answer.
towards ongoing energy saving projects
Great
or
question.
something else?
Yeah, so the last couple of years, we have budgeted increases in utilities. When we've gotten to the fall, we've not needed those funds in the utility budget, so we've reallocated them to other areas, just depending on what it was going on that fall. We've not added to the pool of the energy efficiency funds, at least to date.
Good question.
Don't we need to vote on the ADA
Yes.
vote?
We do. We have that.
Cool.
Yep.
I would so move that the full board approve the recommendation of the facility committee for the install of both doors as proposed.
Second.
Do you want to include the pool part of that? Because that's part of the recommendation for the facilities project as well, the repairs to the pool. Or do you want to do that
Did we vote
separate?
on
Yes, we approved the pool and the two doors at the middle school.
I'll
amend my own motion.
Oh, no, not an
The pool
amendment.
addition as stated by Randy.
Thank you.
Okay, so I need a second on the amendment.
Second.
Okay, so we need to vote on the amendment first. So the amendment is to include the pool with the 2 doors at the pool at the high school and the 2 doors at the middle school. Any discussion on that? All in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
Then we have to go back to the motion, which now includes the pool and the 2 doors, and I need any discussion? All in favor of that?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, done with facilities, moving on to the budget committee.
All right, we discussed the contingency funds, several aspects of that, and Steve pointed out some of the needs that may be coming up for spending for supporting in some of the buildings for staff, and so at this point, the contingency fund has sufficient funds to cover those needs if and when they come up. And we looked at the actuarial study, and with the new audit team, we ended up seeing that our unfunded liability was actually $2 million less in debt, and so we are pleased to see that. They uncovered some additional fundings that we had involved with that, and that's primarily for our local retirement and benefits package, not the state ETF program. We also discussed in transportation a concern regarding the solo busing that is taking place and the cost of that, and so we approved that Steve would begin studying the feasibility of perhaps providing our own individual transportations for those critical students in need of that versus sending out a solo bus for one student. And so we'll be waiting to hear from that. And then Steve shared the budget timeline, which I'll turn over to you, Steve. I don't know how much of that you want to go into, then that'll come up later.
We did just share the initial draft of the 2020-2021 budget planning process with the committee. We're getting some feedback on that. That agenda item will be coming back to the next meeting. Hopefully we'll schedule a meeting in early January. We also had another agenda item related to the potential in November 2020 referendum. That is the financial advisor services for the district. We ran out of time at the meeting and are going to bring that back to a future meeting. We also did review the audit that was that's on the agenda later on tonight for your consideration. We did talk about the audit communication letter that was included in the audit, and later on in the evening we'll be able to answer any questions you might have about that topic.
I noticed in the minutes that the summer science, is that an item that we need to approve? Is that an action item for the evening, or?
So what Joan is referencing is one of the other items we talked about under the 2020-2021 budget planning process was a discussion on the summer science program fees. The feedback from the committee, you can see in the notes, was to remove salary and benefits from the fees for the 2020 summer school session. That will come back to the entire board when our summer school coordinator brings
Okay.
the full slate of fees.
All right,
I think it's at the February meeting.
okay. Thank you.
I would just like to reinforce the great news and the good decision to go with a new auditing group and their recommendation to get a new actuarial group. We continue to reap benefits from that decision, so I just would again like to commend us for the merits of having fresh eyes on new things.
Thank you. Moving on to, in our committee list, to co-curricular committee.
I can do this one. Marcy, if you want to come up, please. Tonight on the co-curricular committee reviewed 2 co-curricular requests for new clubs at the middle school. They're requesting from staff and from Marcy a recommendation for a middle school GSA club and a Wild club. GSA is not looking for any funding for that club. It is really looking to establish itself to align with the equivalent at the high school. There's about a dozen kids that are currently interested or have been working with our social worker, Jonathan Wild, who's bringing that piece forward. The Wild Club is a sustainability club. It lines up with some of our clubs at the high school who have similar type of environmental focuses. And there's some students who are very interested, and M. Meyer and Cassandra Taylor are moving those pieces forward. So the committee reviewed both of those. The staff were there to present them, and they were recommended on a unanimous basis to the committee for recommendation. I've asked Marcy to be here in the event that there are any questions with regards to those clubs as they're in front of you tonight.
And is GSA Girl Scouts of America?
No, that's Gay Straight Alliance.
Oh, sorry. Okay, thought I asked for that clarification.
Marcy, about how many do you have signed up or showing an interest in each group? Do you have a number, a hard number, or approximate number? Because I didn't see it in the.
No, I pulled all the kids' names out so you didn't see it. So there's about a dozen kids in the GSA, and then the Wild Club has probably 20-some, yeah, 30-some.
What's the nice thing about those clubs is that they're kids of both grade levels who are interested. So what has happened in the past is we've had a majority of 8th graders, and when they move on, it falls apart. Right now, we have a strong number in both grade levels. So it's both clubs, you can see it. There's longevity in both clubs.
So the way our clubs are set up, and it's, as you've seen them come before, they have a 3-year kind of a grace period where they have to establish themselves. They do have the ability, if they've requested at this point, to be considered for compensation for the advisor. GSA is not asking for that, but the Wild Club is after a 3-year period. So if Wild Club is successful and sustains itself over the next 3 years and continues, you may see that request then come forward for the compensation for the advisor. And that's comparable to what we've done with all of our clubs that we've approved at the middle school or high school level.
So, if there's no other questions for Marcy, I would entertain a motion to approve these 2 clubs.
I move that we approve both clubs.
Second.
Any other discussion on the clubs? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, Marcy.
Thank you.
for your
Thanks,
leadership.
Marcy.
Moving on to curriculum committee. We have several new courses, new
Yes.
exciting courses.
Yes, so the main business for the last meeting of the curriculum committee was new course proposal reviews. We have 3, 2 are related, so they're really in 2 lanes. So the first are 2 8th grade electives, and they're for family and consumer science. Right now, we have a single family and consumer science 8th grade elective. Tech Ed has 2, so you have Tech Ed 8 and you have Gateway to Technology. And the proposal from the family and consumer science teachers is that we unpack the existing 8th grade elective into 2, one being children and foods and one being fabrics and interiors. They think it'll kind of better differentiate and provide a little more focus for what kids are getting in there. Also, with the redesign of the 7th grade exploratory, the amount of family and consumer science time they get in 7th grade has gone from a half year to a quarter year, and that changed some of the prior knowledge students would have coming into the elective. So again, they felt that was a good reason to make the shift. This is probably going to lead to a similar number of students taking an 8th grade family and consumer science elective, but now they'll spread out over 2 instead of 1. So we don't really anticipate a noticeable financial impact from the 2 8th grade family and consumer science electives. Any questions on those before we move on to digital communications?
So is that 2 semester classes or 2-year classes?
So they will be
Or less?
every other day for the year.
Okay.
So what happens to the base class that you're saying this is now kind of a division of?
So the current 8th grade elective in Family Consumer Science will be retired and will be replaced by these two. CBS is going away, and we have the Food Network and HGTV.
Okay.
So moving along to the high school proposal, digital communications. You may remember a few years ago with the Warrior Stadium project, part of the discussions we had around the addition of the new scoreboard and the Daktronics capabilities was that we would be providing an opportunity for our students to get involved in that. And so Jason McConnell, one of our communication arts instructors at the high school, has been learning the new system over the last 2 years, and he's come to us with a course proposal, which we're expecting is kind of the follow through on that prior set of conversations. And this would give our students an opportunity to actually plan and design the content for the scoreboard in terms of the advertising placements with business and community partners. It would give them a chance to work with the marketing courses and collaborate on that aspect of the scoreboard work. And this would be for really both the fall and the spring seasons. This is a higher resource investment, not so much on the staffing side, but on some of the equipment side. But we feel we have the initial startup costs covered. We've looked at this with the technology budget. And long-term, because this will allow students to receive some industry certifications, we'll be able to tap money from the state program that reimburses school districts for kids who complete industry credentials. And we also anticipate, if needed, we can tap a little bit of the advertising revenue. We know that advertising revenue has a long-term purpose for replacement cycles in the stadium, but if necessary, we could potentially think a little bit could go towards the course.
If I can add something to it, when Jason was talking about the advertising pieces, right now we have these are not the ones that are on the outside of the scoreboard, the large donors. They're the ones that had I think a 3 or 4 year commitment to the pieces that were shown at different times in the game. They're going to work with the sports marketing class to look at how they could fully use the capabilities of that, and you could sell larger and shorter segments. So I think it's coming right at a time where those initial agreements with the initial advertisers is coming due. So this would now fall in where our marketing students would work with digital electronics classes to work with the marketing, sell some of the ads, and then also be able to then articulate and put those up there. So pretty exciting program.
We have a very good scoreboard, as I think you know, and so students who complete this course, we think will be very attractive to businesses with this type of technology, and attractive to other athletic venues that have this type of technology.
Cool stuff.
I would just like to acknowledge all of Jason's hard work and patience to actually take the time to pull together and gain competencies so he really could make a class that was meaningful to student experience. There's a lot to that scoreboard, so he's leveraging what he's learned, and we will be able to pass it on down and keep it going. He's had kids working with him on this. It's just to pull it all together into a meaningful class. He did a lot of work and was very, very thoughtful about how he did that. And
Very, very
many.
passionate about it.
Yeah.
I think you'll have a hard time holding it to its numbers. I think you'll have a lot more popularity in that class.
It'll be a piece that I'll also want us to have a conversation facilities-wise when we go into the referendum piece, to just see how we can help support some of the green room type stuff that goes into this. And the part that I find exciting, and I think he articulated it well with the committee, was it's not just kids who are interested in sports who are going to want to be part of this. It's kids who are coming from the different digital design classes that see this as an avenue for creativity, etc. So it's going to provide a lot of opportunity for a lot of kids. Marketing pieces, and the kids who really want to move into it have the ability to then hopefully transfer some of those Daktronic skills when they go on to college. It's the same type of board and instrumentation that's used at Camp Randall and many of the colleges around the area.
Yeah, the students really won't be gaining a competency that will be
It'll be a
immediately
career.
career builder and immediately marketable.
Michelle McGlynn is looking at kind of the certificational pieces of
Yeah.
it. That's where Tim was talking about being able to grab into some of those industry certifications where we get some funding back too. So that's a
It's a
very
big
cool
deal.
program.
Does Dectronics help us as well?
Yeah, he's been collaborating with them throughout this whole process.
So Daktronics, Julie's exactly right. You know, Daktronics has been a real good partner for us. They have a curriculum, so all of the resources come with the Daktronics. If you have questions, they're available as needed. I mean, obviously they have other people to support, but no additional cost. So they've been extremely good that way. The cost for us really are on the technology side, and not the Daktronics software, but some of the Adobe software. But we purchase that for other things as well, but that's where the cost would be coming from.
They also helped link us with other districts that are further along the process of developing the course.
Yes.
So that, you know, that kind of collaboration and being able to, lessons learned from other districts was
Yeah.
a big piece of it too.
What do you need, motion to approve?
Yes,
Motion
please.
to approve all of the classes, please.
All of the classes. These three that.
These three,
Yeah,
these
yeah.
are the three that are up this year.
Are you moving that, Jen? And I am seconding that.
Any other discussion or questions for Tim? If not, all in favor of these new courses?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Opposed? Thank you. And our last committee report is the Goals Committee, and it centers around our priorities that we talked about last month. You reviewed, we addressed a few minutes in our board development at the beginning of our meeting, and this is up for approval tonight. So if you're ready to approve, I'll entertain that motion or any other discussion.
Before you do that, John, can I just read what they are for the public, so that they
Perfect.
kind of know what they
Sure.
are? So the board has set aside 5 different goals, and just to give you some high-level ideas of what they're about. The first one is really around referendum planning and and long-range facility planning. Second one is addressing building stronger connections between school buildings, the staff, and the board. Third one is looking at strategic budget planning and how does our budget allocations align with our strategic planning work. Fourth one is policy review. Our policy book needs to be reviewed on a rotational basis, and we are taking a large step forward with that. And the fifth one is to take a look at employee compensation and benefits. So those are the 5 high-level priorities that the board has set for the year.
Which may be more than 1 year for some of these, but they are where we're at right now. So, anybody who's ready to make a motion for those? Or did you make a motion?
I was in the process, so
Okay.
So I move we accept the goal committee recommendation, planning.
Okay.
And I second that.
Okay, any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Perfect, thank you. To our administrative reports, tonight we have strategic planning. Randy, you want to introduce that?
I will, absolutely. I know, AB, you're going to be leading this group, so I'm going to give you a little bit, as you're walking forward, a little bit of a preamble to really what's going on tonight. Tonight, we're going to really set aside the next 45-plus minutes to really take a look at our referendum planning process timelines, give these gentlemen an opportunity to introduce their teams to the board. Traditionally, we don't bring these larger type of items to a regular board meeting, but I think when we take a look at our timelines that we have for the work that's moving forward, and before we get into our meeting that we have next Monday, where we'll be doing a tour of Heritage, I think it's really important to, one, get a sense of what this process looks like, what the timelines look like, and really set the stage for the work that we have ahead of us between now and a November potential referendum issue. So, AB, I'm going to turn it over to you to do your introductions and to take it over.
I'll take a moment to introduce our project team, and Robin Savola reminded me to introduce those also who are not present but behind the scenes working as well. So I'm AB Katchturian, Senior Project Manager for EUA, and I'm also representing Robin Savola, who's a project manager. We'll also mention Mike Schwindenhammer, who's a senior design architect, one of Chris's colleagues, and Eric Dufek, our studio director, who's been very engaged both in the past work that we've done for you as well as this. So with that, I'll turn it over to the other team members to introduce themselves.
I'm Andy Lyons, Upside Unit Architects, Communications and Engagement Specialist. I'll be supporting the project by ensuring the community has a voice in the planning process. I'll be working side by side with a woman by the name of Kit Daly. Many of you probably remember Kit from the last planning process back in 2014. She is fantastic, and I'm looking forward to working with her as we move forward.
And I'm Chris Michaud. I'm a senior design architect with EUA. Happy to be back in Waunakee. I'll be doing essentially what I did last time. You know, planning with you during the pre-referendum, and then anything successful going forward, being the lead design on one of the projects following that, at least a portion.
Perfect. I'm Jay Thompson, Vice President of Vogel Brothers Building Company. We're serving the role as construction manager for this project. And we've got a few team members behind me, but as you see on the screen there, Pete Vogel's going to be involved in the pre-referendum as well from the community standpoint. Ross Rayfelt has got 40 years of experience in the education industry, and he's going to be providing a lot of insight on the constructability and budgeting here on the front end over the next few months, specifically as we pull together costs on the projects. Eric Ballweg and Heather Mankey are both behind me here tonight, providing a lot of resource from a community engagement standpoint, and then Heather with graphic design as collateral gets put out into the community to put out the information. And then the three people on the right, Frank, Rich, and Tia, they're project managers for us that will be involved in the various aspects of the project once we fully develop really what that scope looks like.
All right, so I'm going to talk just a little bit on long-range facilities planning, just to talk a little bit about the process that we use so you guys can sort of understand. It's very similar to the process we used last time. Our firm uses an acronym we call LEAD, which stands for Learn, Explore, Articulate, and Deliver, and that loosely aligns with the different tiers that you see here in the pyramid. And right now, we're in that learning and exploring phase. So we're meeting with stakeholders for your building. We're learning where we left off in your district last time, what the challenges you have right now are going forward, getting all that information to explore ways in which we can address the needs of the district. Next Monday, we're going to be meeting at Heritage to go over those specifically focused on heritage. Later on in January, we're going to be looking at some other aspects with regards to existing middle school and high school. As we go up into that options phase, with the discussions that we have with the district, we're going to begin to solidify or at least generate a number of options for you to evaluate. Those are going to have cost measures put to them. They're going to show you how they address the capacity issues coming in your district and address some of the needs that some of your buildings have, whether it be educational needs or facility maintenance needs. You will then have information that you can go forward to your community to see what they will support. When you go and you talk to them about the needs that this district currently has and the needs that they're going to be facing in the near future. And that'll take the form of essentially a community survey. We'll talk a little bit about that later. And you'll get a really good idea as to what type of and what kind of level that community is going to have. And all of that will eventually hone into, I would say, a solution which will now further develop your already existing master plan, sort of takes it to the next phase of development. So as we get to the next slide, this is the master plan. This might look familiar for some of you that was generated in the last go around. And I think the important things to note on this plan is some of the columns. The one on the far left is your paths column. And last referendum, you selected a path for the future of this district. And we're continuing down that path that was established. And paths really largely had to do with understanding how to organize your grade structures in the district, to see if there, at least back in 2012 and 2014, if there are ways in which you could think about organizing your district a little differently to address some of the needs you had then. The district selected a path, roughly, to remain at a K-4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, and we're going to go forward with that here. As we look at various options, when we get into looking at the different components of what you may go forward with in November, we're going to look at various options on that. And those options will run the gamut, and that's part of that option development I just talked about in that process. And then the two other columns here really are, what is it going to look like in your immediate term? What does, say, a November 2020 referendum look like? And then what does, which I would describe as a phase 2, phase 1, 2014. And then what does phase 3 in the future, 10 to 15 years, look like? So as we master plan, we're not just master planning for the moment, we're setting you up so you can carry out a plan just like we did the previous time around. So just to recap, I just referred to it just a second ago as phase 1. We've been talking about what happened in 2014 as phase 1. And there we had a small addition on Prairie Elementary. We did some renovation work at Heritage. There was some capital maintenance type of work that occurred at both of those schools. And then, of course, we built a new intermediate school at that site. With the new building coming online, there was also an operating referendum to support the operations of that building. So as we begin to look at phase 2, next slide, the projects that are coming out that we're identifying right now are essentially listed here. Looking at what wasn't completed at Heritage during phase 1 and finishing Heritage to make that a true 6-track elementary school for the district. Looking at completing the campus plan over at Woodland with the intermediate school by adding a middle school at that site. So that site would now be 5, 8, and 2 buildings. And then as you build a new middle school, what do you do with your existing middle school? How does that get utilized and repurposed? Looking how the high school can utilize that space. Looking how other parts of the district, for instance at TLC building, whether there are programs there that we can utilize that space. These are things that we're currently evaluating. Coupled with, and I would say Randy touched a little bit on it earlier in the meeting tonight, looking at the current state of some of the programs in the high school, and do they begin to flex or use spaces in the middle school? Do we look at where they are in the existing high school and begin to make those more robust based on some of the new programs that might be coming on, or the current state of some of the facilities there that might need some attention sooner than later, all right? There's also a large district-wide maintenance list that we need to evaluate to see what are the items on that maintenance list that need to be executed within the next few years, and what are ones that can remain on the list for a long period of time. Administrative spaces, there are a couple small things that all begin to fill out what would eventually become a comprehensive option, right? And we'll present to you each and every one of those different facets, and then you can evaluate which ones to move forward with. And then gray down on the bottom there is phase 3, because there are components of this that will have an impact on your facilities down the road, even after potentially some work is done during the second phase. And we want to make sure that we're thinking about those appropriately, and any work that we do in the current projects potentially that come out of this allow for some of those phase 3 projects to seamlessly work into it. So that's kind of a very quick overview of kind of what we're going to be going through the next couple of months with regards to option development. So we're looking forward to it, and I think I'm going to turn it back over to Amy for a little bit of schedule stuff.
Yeah, I'm actually going to say a word or two, if you don't mind. So Chris spoke about a lot of work that needs to happen over the course of the next several months. We want to spend the next couple of minutes talking about how we've laid out a timetable or a project schedule that accomplishes that work, and should the board so choose, gets you ready for the ballot in November of 2020. So let's talk a little bit about that project schedule. I want to start out at a fairly high level. AB will then delve a little bit into the details. Before we get into the schedule itself, I do want to lay out a little bit of terminology. Back in 2014, we worked with a slightly different process with all of you. We had slightly less time. We started working with the district in around March of 2014, if I remember correctly. So we've got a little bit more time this go around. That affords us the opportunity to engage in a slightly different process. We've talked a little bit already about this idea of a board workshop or a number of board workshops. There are opportunities for the board to delve into a little bit more detail on specific projects. Heritage is upcoming on the 16th of December. January 6th, I believe, we're going to be doing a board workshop on the existing middle school and the high school, and we'll have a handful of additional board workshops that kind of fill in throughout the springtime. We're also planning a community workshop and a staff workshop in the months that follow here. Again, opportunities with both of those constituencies to delve into a little bit more detail, gather input from those stakeholder groups, and really have two-way conversations with both the community as a whole and staff as well. I want to point out this second to last bullet here, this idea of the key communicators. It's not something that we did back in 2014, but we think that there's an opportunity to gather together representatives from a number of those key stakeholder groups throughout the community and basically utilize them as a sounding board. Provide information to them and rely upon their really broad, deep networks to distribute that information throughout the community. So, high level, long range facilities planning timeline. We are in December of 2019. As Chris alluded to, we are in the process of starting to develop options, assessing those options, and as we get into the new year, developing costs. The school board will be reviewing and vetting all of those options and costs. And as we get into the springtime, the school board will be refining those options and costs based on the data and the community engagement work that we do with the community as a whole. We've got two committees that are really involved in the process. The facilities committee is going to be working in depth on that facilities maintenance list. It's an extensive list, and they'll be working to assess and prioritize that list, those needs over the course of the next several months. The budget committee will be taking a look at facilities costs, and then we've got this additional operating component as well that the budget committee will be potentially taking a look at as well. Throughout this process, we're weaving in community engagement. We want to do one-way communications to ensure that the community is up to date and up to speed, but we also want to engage in two-way communications through these workshops with the community, with the staff as well, so we're sure that we're gathering input from them as the process lays itself out. And importantly, we've got this community survey upcoming in the month of April, potentially May as well. You're familiar with that process. You deployed a community survey back in 2014. It's a fantastic way to gather input from a lot of different residents on the facilities planning process and potential solutions. All of those data will feed their way back to the board level as you think about finalizing a project in time for that authorization deadline, which is the 25th of August. And then, should you choose to authorize, then we engage in the real kind of nitty-gritty of the community engagement and public information campaign, ensuring that residents have all the facts that they need to make an informed choice come election day. So that's the high-level look at the planning timeline. Talked about some of those key milestones already. Key, I think, of all of these is that community survey in April and May. It'll probably go out in April with results coming back in May. That's a really, really critical component to all of this. And a lot of our additional work is kind of benchmarked or back planned from that community survey. Randy, I think you wanted to maybe say a word or two about the community survey.
Yeah,
is that right?
I've reached out. We worked with Bill Foster and School Perceptions during the last iteration of this. I think that was a really good process. Those surveys take quite a bit of time in preparation, and knowing that 2020 is probably going to be also a big referendum year for many different districts, we've tentatively been on Bill's list for doing this survey. He's been in communication with him. Just wanted to let the board know that if we want to do the survey, I'm going to be really signing on the line to get that in place so that we can reserve that spot, and then we'll start working on that survey probably shortly after we get, probably not far after the first of the year, we'll start really starting to put together those pieces.
Probably,
So
yeah.
my thought is I just wanted to bring to your attention that this is a piece that we're laying out there. It's out in the future, but it's actually got some pretty short-term implications that I'm going to need to kind of start engaging with so that we can start implementing the work in this survey.
Maybe.
So as we take a look at a bit of the detail, the operative word here is accountability to the Board of Education, accountability to the community. So I think Andy has laid out that process, that there has to be a lot of that back and forth. And so what's the cadence of that? 10 meetings pre-survey. So you've got six regular meetings plus 4 board workshops, which gives you more time to intensively take a look. And then 3 meetings post-survey. And then of course we've got the facilities and budget committees that have their periodic meetings. So as we take a look at the schedule on the right, and I realize it's not as legible at the moment, but the cadence here is always for us to have the core team meetings that we have with Randy, Steve, and John, and with Jay and his team on a bi-weekly basis. As a result of that, we have interjections also of engagement with principals at Heritage High School and so forth that Chris and Mike have been leading. All of that information essentially then informs the core team and then helps us prepare for all these different milestones. So we see it as a cadence where on a very regular basis, we're coming back because there's that accountability. And it's also going to give you that ability to touch the community in a regular fashion so that they feel that they have a voice. As Andy said, not just a one-way communication, but in fact a two-way communication through these different media.
All right, so I wanted to say a word or two about communications and engagement. Before I do so, I did want to point out that that full schedule is included, I think, in your board book. It was attached. So if you want to go through in detail, that schedule is there. We have not yet settled on all of the dates, as you probably noticed, but as this kind of planning team continues to meet, we'll solidify dates, particularly with respect to some of those workshops, and we'll keep the board informed, certainly. So, communications and engagement. Another thing that is attached to your board book, this document. It is a key messages matrix. This is something that is not necessarily for public use. It is kind of our foundational key messages or talking points. And it's a document that we will continue to update as we move through the facilities planning process. But we've got talking points, We've got a more detailed or articulated message that goes along with that talking point, and then some data points, some evidence that supports that message and those talking points. We thought it would be a really nice resource to maintain for the board as we move through the planning process, not only because it provides you with good talking points as you talk to your constituents, but also because it makes the development of some of these resources, newsletters, fact sheets, really easy. These are just our kind of agreed upon talking points. It's very easy to generate material from that are more kind of public facing. Also, we talked a little bit already about this idea of the key communicators. Got to say congratulations to the administrative team. They have put in some really hard work, and they have essentially developed a map or an inventory of all of your stakeholder groups, or many of the stakeholder groups throughout the community. We've got a list of, I believe now 60 or 70 of different youth athletics, civic, municipal, business groups that again have a key contact associated with them, that person's email and phone number. It represents your community, those folks again that have really broad deep networks within the broader Waunakee community. So this will be a really nice resource moving forward as we seek to engage your stakeholders. And this is a resource that we've got available online on the project's Google Drive. And then finally, just a real quick shout out to Heather back there from Vogel Brothers. She did a really nice job developing a long-range planning template that we'll be able to use with parents and staff. Just real brief updates on what's happening at the board level, post-board meeting. We want to make sure that staff, parents in particular, are used to hearing from the board after the board is hearing about long-range planning. That's going to serve us well in the long range, in the long term. So we will develop content, plug it into this template, and hopefully post-board meeting, you'll see this material distributed to parents and staff, and maybe beyond that as well.
So in terms of next steps, I think Andy has already articulated some of the dates. December 16, board workshop focusing on heritage. January 6, focusing on existing middle school. And then by January 13, we'll have a board meeting presentation to go through options and paths. And all through this, of course, facilities committee and budget committees are beginning to study the various aspects of capital maintenance, prioritization, and operational needs. We should also mention that early on, it won't be quite possible to dovetail that, but later on, our minds are very much focused to see, and Andy and I discussed this today, what are some of the capital maintenance things that fall off, so to speak, because they get absorbed in a project. They either reside here or they reside there, but not both. And so we'll be mindful. Right now, it's too soon. We're at a very high level, rough order of magnitude, but as we get into more and more detail, we're going to keep an eye on those opportunities and say what makes sense to pull in and so on and so forth. So with that, I guess we will open it up to your questions, if any.
I guess one of the things as you walk through Heritage, you know, it's a very old building, you know, built back in the turn of the century. Are you guys looking at potentially taking some of that down? Or?
We do have, good point. I think the earliest portions that were built in the 1940s, and then progressively after there's significant parts in the 1960s, and if you begin to look at how old portions of that building are, typically when we're developing options, we'll be able to evaluate, you know, if you keep this but then have to renovate it and bring it up to a level that's acceptable, what is that compared to just taking it down? And there are some sort of rules of thumb out there in terms of cost versus building new, or cost of renovation versus cost of building new. To your point, we are exploring all potential scenarios. So some which keep it as is, some which maybe take portions of it down. So.
That'll be part of our conversation next week, and I believe you'll see like 2 different just mocked up options, one that keeps it as is and one that brings forth some pieces that the team has worked with Dan at Heritage on that might look at a different way of looking at the site.
Yeah, you'll see it next week, some of the things that we discussed, and really the goal for that is to, one, tell us if we're going in the right direction, right? You know, to have discussions about all these different ways in which you could look at that building. But then 2, you know, out of that discussion, are there things that haven't been identified or potentials out there that we can, you know, potentially bring in and formulate a different option on it? You know, we want to get everything on the table. We want to have that discussion to make sure as we go forward, you know, the board's in kind of a unison on, yeah, this makes sense to go this route. We're going to highlight options. Next week, we will not have costs associated with those options, but those will be coming in January. So I know it's hard to make a decision without having costs. So we're not asking you to make decisions. We're just asking for the dialogue next Monday to sort of inform these options.
Some of the criteria that come into this and some of the things that are happening behind the scenes as we speak are the evaluate the building on a multiple level. How is it behaving as a school? How does it behave with the different scenarios as a school? What opportunities do you get if you try this option versus that? How does it behave as a building in terms of energy? How does it behave in terms of the code compliance, fire safety, so on? So those are all the things, and we'll be very crystal clear to explain those. We want to be completely forthright in saying, these are the foundational backgrounds of these decisions. What do you think? What does the community value? And obviously the building has a community value as well. So what can be kept, you know, and augmented? In some cases, in other cases, maybe more is kept. And that's what Chris and the team are looking at, a variety of different approaches for your review.
I have a question and then I guess an explanation as to why I'm asking my question. Has the team thought at all about going in and looking at the other elementary schools in the district other than Heritage to see how we can accomplish ensuring that there is, I guess, an equitable distribution of resources between the elementary schools in the district? And the reason I bring this up is because I'm never going to have kids that go to Heritage. Both my boys go to Arboretum, so I've got to hear the pitch that Principal Wire says to new families every year when kindergartners come in about how this is a great school. We designed it with curved hallways in a specific way to make it open. And it's not lost on anybody who goes into Heritage or Prairie that it's different from Arboretum. So Waunakee has a complex history when it comes to the new Waunakee and the old Waunakee. And I don't think it's lost on anybody that Heritage is old Waunakee. So that's a long question to ask. Are we looking at other buildings to see if we can ensure that Heritage is treated with the same quality that other schools do?
Yeah, just to clarify, when you say looking at other buildings, we're not looking at other buildings to do renovation or work in other buildings, but we are looking at your other elementary schools to ensure that there's a baseline of equity amongst your schools. Now, if you look at your 3 elementary schools, they are very different from an architectural point of view, and there are things that you cannot change or you will not change unless they're rebuilt, right? But from an offering and from a student environment, we're looking to establish a baseline level of equity and to try to make those school experiences as equitable as possible. So.
The vast majority of that is now equalized by districts by the use of curriculum. And technology to support curriculum is what I meant to say. So be it smart boards, TVs, wireless access points. So to the extent that those have parity and education can be delivered in those classrooms. And the other tier then is the idea of having areas for additional enrichment, breakout areas of some sort that you'll see in the newer schools. So the unfortunate thing though is that through the evolution of design, it's really difficult to go back unless you're doing something massive. So the good news is that technology is augmenting today. so much of it is technology reliant. And then one last aspect is you'll notice a lot of the buildings today have a lot of natural light. And that's because glazing has become much more affordable and energy conscious. So we can go with low E glass, and we can increase the amount of glass and natural light, which is thought to improve education. So you're never going to get a complete parity, but I agree with Chris. We do go in with a sense of, as parents as well, we go in with a sense of, we realize as a district, you don't have a choice oftentimes, you know, or you do have some choice, but you're sort of in this community or that community. We do want to be cognizant. We do want to understand how that's being supported and make sure that anything we do is informed by that, and through our past work, that there's some level of consistency of delivery.
Great.
If I could add something to that, Mike. I mean, one of the things I appreciate about this team is they look specifically at and bring up and lead with, how do you teach? How do your kids learn? What do you want your space to be? Now, there's limitations, obviously, as we've talked through Heritage, but I know a piece and a value that Dan has brought forward is the natural lighting, the windows, pieces that have been a continued conversation. That is a high priority for this. And also looking at how do you create the types of spaces and learning environments that does create some of that equity that you're trying to work at. Can it look the same? Probably not. But there are going to be options, as Jack brought up, that there may be a piece you'll see next Tuesday where there, as you start to pair in the cost of some of the facility maintenance with the functionality of the building, there may be other options that evolve that may involve adding a new section to the building. And that's all part of what we'll kind of start exploring next week. But it truly gets at some of the pieces that you're bringing up.
I'd just like to affirm what I've seen at the renovation of the early end of the elementary, the K2 area. I have grandson as a kindergarten, and we've all seen that part, and a terrific job of trying to expand what is there within the structure to create the atmosphere that's not a clone of or a copy of, but comparable to in terms of the spirit of how you're trying to instruct and the spaces you're trying to give for breakout rooms and that sort of thing. So I know that's going to be the interesting dance as you go into the older part of the old intermediate, the cost efficiency. Can we renovate at a better price than we can add on? And your studies are going to tell us that.
Great question, yeah, exactly.
I can just add a couple of things. When we take a look at our process from 2014, there's a few differences, and I know the team went through and hit on them, but I just wanted to reiterate them so you have them in your mind. The workshop process is new to us. That's something that I know you guys have had some experience in other districts with, but you'll be bringing that forward to us, not only with the board, with the community, but also with the staff. So that was a piece we've talked about in our core team. The key communicators group was not a piece we had in the past, and I think that was a part. We can really decide how we want to utilize that list of people that really are key leaders in our community. It may be from an informational piece. It may be more formal in some sort of a gathering at some point. That'll be a piece the board can decide as we go through the process. The talking points piece that Andy discussed, I think that's a key piece, because that'll be a part that I think we had at our last referendum efforts, but it was something I like the format that you've really laid it out in, and it gives some rationale to it, and it keeps us all on the same page, no matter which of us are speaking or discussing items with the community. It keeps us really having a similar message. And it also provides the information for you as board members to know what the answer is if something comes up, or a resource to refer to. So I think those are some of the primary differences. And I know the Vogel team is going to be working on some of the costing pieces, because I know a few of you have asked me about when does costing of different options or the maintenance pieces come forward. As we've started to lay out some of the high-level options, particularly at Heritage, for example, they're already started on some of that work. So those pieces will start to filter through, and I think the part with the timeline is we have to utilize all of our meetings efficiently as we move forward, because there's a lot to really absorb and make some decisions on this spring.
Absolutely.
All right, any questions for the team? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Very good. The other part of our strategic plan is, Tim, you have a testing, assessment, accountability report?
So this is a high-level overview of our state assessment results from the spring of 2019, the end of last year, and also our state accountability report cards. There's obviously a lot more data that underpins this. If you have specific questions, you can try to cover some of them now, but otherwise I just encourage you to set up a time and we can go over it in greater detail. Just a few highlights to call your attention to, starting with the positives. Our students continue to perform very well on the state assessments in both English language arts, which is abbreviated as ELA here, and mathematics. This is really true at all grade levels. Our overall ELA and mathematics proficiency rates led Dane County last year. And our high school juniors placed 12th in the state overall among ACT, among public school districts, and again, led in Dane County. The Aspire results, that's the state 9th and 10th grade assessment, were stable at a good rate. For the accountability report cards, our district report card, once again, led Dane County and overall was 13th in the state among K-12 public school districts. Now, there are always areas for further attention, and two areas that do have our attention is that we have seen a multi-year trend of decreasing ACT average scores, proficiency rates, and percentage of students meeting certain benchmarks among the juniors. And in particular, the softness is not so much at the higher end, it's really in our lower middle. And so that's something that we're looking at and was part of the high school's improvement plan for this year. We also continue to have gaps among different student populations. So this chart is showing us for the 4 content areas of English language arts, mathematics, science, and social studies, the last 4 years on the forward exam. And this is taking the grades that take the forward, and there are 6 grades, grades 3 through 8 take the forward. So this is combining all of those 6 grades to give you an overall picture. And what you see here is generally stable results for ELA, science, and mathematics. Math is actually a little bit on an upswing. Social studies, it looks like we took a drop, and by the numbers we did. However, what really happened is we had a very large increase in opt-outs in the 10th grade. And if you opt out, you can't count as proficient. And if you backed in our participation rate from 2018, you would have a number very close to the preceding year number. So really that 3-point drop on social studies is really almost entirely due to 10th grade opt-outs, which is something we can encourage students and their families about the benefits, the powerful benefits of taking the 10th grade state exam. But if they choose not to, it doesn't count against us in accountability, it just brings down the number. Now this is the ACT trend that I was referring to just a moment ago. And what you see here is that our numbers for the spring of 2019 are the lowest in the 4-year series for state calculated proficiency rates for English language arts and mathematics, also for science, and also for the average composite score. Now, the picture looks a little different depending on which of the 4 charts you look at, but the trend is pretty consistent. And so this is definitely something that's concerning. These are still strong overall results, but the direction obviously is not the direction we would like to see.
Tim,
Joe?
are students allowed to opt out of this one as well?
So they can, Joan, but we typically see a pretty high participation rate on the ACT. So yes, they can, and occasionally we have some students, typically high-performing students, but you can typically count these on one hand out of over 300 in the class, who may have already taken the ACT even before February of their junior year, and they have an ACT target in mind for their preferred schools, and if they've hit it, they won't take the ACT anymore. There's no advantage to them in doing it. But that's a small number of students, and that's really not where we're seeing the erosion in performance. It's not, if you were to look at the top group of our students in 2019 versus the preceding years, that segment, the performance really looks similar with no decline. It's really in the lower middle where we've seen some step back. So that's kind of where we're focusing, and what's the support structure looking like? Are we identifying kids timely and things of that nature? One thing I will say is that, we did have a difficult set of winter weather into the lead up to the ACT, so I don't think you can attribute a multi-year trend to that, but maybe a little bit of this year's dip is that. Moving on to our accountability report cards. There's a lot of information here, but I'm trying to bring it all onto one table. So you see the district report card on the top row, and you see our 6 schools on the following rows. And the first thing I want to call attention to is that the district and 5 of our 6 schools were in the highest possible level of significantly exceeds expectations. There are 5 levels. The middle school is an exceeds expectation, but the cut point is at 83. So they were less than a point away from being in that highest level. If you go to the column that's headed by change, you will see that all of our schools and the district increased overall, except the middle school held steady, and Arboretum, which is our highest scoring school, had a very, very slight decline of 0.2 points. So again, the overall picture is extremely positive there. And then you can see student achievement, growth, closing gaps, on track for post-secondary readiness. In general, it's a very positive picture. So, again, I think, if you were to compare this to the county at large, to the state at large, these are very positive results. The detailed report cards are linked off of our website. And again, if you or any other member of the public who may be watching this wants to kind of walk through those documents in more detail with me, I'd just be happy to do that. Jack?
What's going on in the middle school at the student growth? What is student growth?
So student growth on the state report card is calculated using something called a value added measure, where they take your pre-test and post-test, which in this case would be spring 6 to spring 7, and then spring 7th grade to spring 8th grade. And then they apply some statistical adjustments based on the student's demographics. So think multiple regression. So if there's a slope for being economically disadvantaged, or a slope for students with disabilities, if there's a slope for prior achievement status, those adjustments are used in a multi-level model to adjust that simple growth rate. And when we do that, the middle school has lower growth than our other schools. I think that's been a long-term trend. I think if you look at the instructional blocks, the middle school operates on an 8-period day, which is in a sense what the high school does. The high school gets their 8-period day over 2 days, though. So when students meet at the high school, they meet for 84, 85 minutes. Whereas at the middle school, you have more of a traditional skinny. So it's, is it an artifact of smaller chunks of instructional time when we have it? Is it an artifact of other schools having a flex block every day of the week, in the middle school having wind time twice a week? Is it curricular factors? We don't know for sure, but it's been a persistent issue, and it's something Marcy and I have looked at over the years, and There are some other things, we got our federal accountability reports today. They use a slightly different growth measure, and it's a lower growth compared to some of the other schools, but it's a much brighter number compared to this. So part of it may be methodology too. Well, I think it's something we pay attention to because I think ideally you'd want to see the growth at a higher level. Mike?
Tim, I know this is just 1 year. Is that drop between intermediate to middle school typical, or is that something that's just this year?
So, without going too deep into the accountability calculations, none of these schools are calculated in the same way. So they're all put in the same level. The numbers look like they're the same, but it would be like if you had mileage stickers on the car in the dealer lot, but they tested them differently, and one was using ethanol and one was using high test. And the biggest thing is the ratio of student achievement to student growth is dependent on your percent of free and reduced lunch. So every school is calculated a little differently. So when you see a 90 and an 82, those were arrived at differently. And if we went into the report cards, I could kind of show you how it's done by the state. I wouldn't really read too much into that. Julie?
Although I would say anecdotally, there in general is a feeling that the rigor and the demands and the expectations we place on our students at the intermediate is pretty dang high. And there is a persistent perception that somehow the foot gets let off the gas a bit at the middle school. And I don't know if that's tied developmentally, I don't know, but it would be interesting if we could ever better get to the bottom of what that is, because to me that number kind of represents that. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think our teachers at the middle school, like all of our teachers, have high expectations for the students, but there are differences. I mean, at the intermediate school, you do have bigger blocks of time for math and ELA, and those are the two subjects that this is ultimately based on student proficiency rates in mathematics and English language arts on the state assessment. So science doesn't count, music doesn't count, technical education doesn't count, and there are bigger blocks of time for that instruction at the intermediate school versus the middle school. The intervention time for those two subjects is also greater at the intermediate school than the middle school. And, time equals opportunity to learn, and so I think there is, without any question, more time for students to learn mathematics and English language arts in 5th and 6th grade than in 7th and 8th. Now, as a system, we've historically made choices that we have a pretty elective-rich middle school. Our middle school operates a lot more as a junior high than a traditional middle school. And the trade-off for giving students all of these elective opportunities, and there's a great case for the elective opportunities, that's why we do it, is you do have less time in English language arts and mathematics, and that is probably at least part of the story here.
I certainly did not mean to suggest that it was something that the teachers were or weren't doing.
Yeah.
It's middle school in particular. I mean, this is true all the time, but it's collaboration between what happens in the building and how parents support it outside of the building. And I think there's a general tendency too, when kids hit middle school, the expectation is just, well, stuff flies apart in middle school, and that's middle school, and it stinks, and you gotta suffer through it, and, so, again, I'm not saying it's all the teachers, I'm just saying the expectation maybe comes from the parents as well, like.
Yeah, there are a whole bunch of things going on, and I've never seen a kids' TV show based on intermediate school experiences, but, middle school, like you said, it's an interesting set of years with a lot of changes. But you're right. I mean, there is, I think, a gradual release of responsibility, some.
That's a good way to put it.
You know, and it's, yeah. And again, I'd be happy to do a deep dive into this. Mike?
This is only because I had a neighbor who specifically asked me, oh, our Raiders numbers are really good. How can I get my child to go there instead of a different school?
Okay.
There's no curricular difference between the elementary schools at all.
There's no curricular difference between the schools. And I think all of our elementary schools are outstanding. It's not up there because I simplified this down, but if you looked at the math growth measure in particular, that's a segment of this, all 3 of our elementary schools maxed out at 50 out of possible 50 points for that. And that was true for Arboretum, Heritage, and Prairie. All 3 of our elementary schools have the same resources, the teachers get the same professional learning. But again, this Arboretum is a phenomenal school. So I want to be very clear that in no way am I trying to put an asterisk on this. But again, Arboretum, Heritage, and Prairie, each of those 3 schools got to that number in the total score by a slightly different route. So it looks apples to apples, but it's not exactly apples to apples. But I can understand. I'm a parent. I see this, and, you know, I want some 95.7. I mean, I definitely understand that.
Because I was initially confused. I said, why do you want to go to a different school? They said, well, they must be teaching something different there.
No.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, okay, I'll ask Tim.
It's because the Brant children go there. That's what I've heard.
It's the blueberries in the box.
So,
Mark.
Tim, I just want to compliment the work that our administration, our staff have done, the students. I mean, these are phenomenal, but as appreciative as I am of seeing the outstanding report, I'm more appreciative of the folks that you and the staff have on areas that we can improve. Those middle gap areas are a huge thing. And it'd be very easy to kind of, let's say we have nothing to do, we're doing a great job. But you're really, you have turned over all the stones, and the staff are committed to helping those students who are not quite where they need to be to get to the next level. I really appreciate that effort.
yeah, thank you, Mark. And I think our school teams, and that's obviously, it begins with teachers, but we have great school leadership with our principals, and it really takes an entire school team to have kids feel totally at home in the school. So that's the paraeducators, it is our custodial staff. I mean, those folks have a lot of access to our kids and help set that tone.
Just the culture.
Yeah, it's a culture. But you'll see closing gaps is our lowest column there. We're acutely aware of that. And I want to assure you and the public that just because we perform very well in Dane County, we have benchmark groups statewide. And we're in the process of going through our benchmark groups right now with principals and associate principals to look at what are their peer schools in the state that might have better results if they're looking for some different ideas. Okay.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Jim,
everybody.
and thank you for those explanations.
Yeah.
Helpful. Moving on to administrative report, the district financial audit.
If you worked on the budget committee, I'm sure you're jealous that we go deep into the actuarial report.
Yes, because that was thrilling.
That was great.
Remember, it's 8:30.
Another fine.
So one of the things we did talk about at the budget committee level for a couple of minutes is you see Rebecca has in Friend's letter report. The thing to know about the letter is it truly is a letter from the audit firm to you as school board members. I talked about at the budget committee level, it's not a letter to Randy and I. It's a letter that the auditor who the board hires is writing you a letter to let you know how that process went. So just keep that in mind. That's the intent of that, is to at a very high level, the audit firm communicating with you about the process that took place this past summer. The report is a quite lengthy document that really covers a wide variety of numbers and funds and calculations, the one thing I did talk about with the budget committee for a little bit is that if you look at the audit report and try to connect some of those numbers to the numbers that you've seen before, there are differences. The reason why there are differences is the numbers in the audit report are based on national accounting standards. One example that I shared with the budget committee is national accounting standards require depreciation of district assets. But the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction does not require that. We do not report that to the DPI. You will not see depreciation of assets on our local financial records. So there are differences between this report and what you sometimes see in our local financial records. So just keep that in mind as you go through that. Sometimes you may see something in there like depreciated assets that you may wonder, why is that in a district's financial report? The reason is because there are differences at times between the national standards and what we do here locally and report to the DPI. So you'll see the full letter from the audit firm to the board, the full audit report as well. And I'd be happy to dive deeper into this with the budget committee if there's particular questions. We basically took a look at the letter and walked through that, but there's more information in there as well, and I'd be happy to answer whatever questions I can. I'd also be happy to be a conduit back to our audit firm. If any board members have any questions for them, I'd be happy to do that as well.
Mark.
And just like Steve, probably too humble on this, but the letter really indicates how he and the entire administrative staff have been extremely forthright in the information, and there's actually zero compliance concerns or issues brought up with our processes. I mean, it was just a very, very positive letter of how we're doing things. So kudos to Steve and his department.
Yes, for sure. Any other concerns on that? Moving to the safety drill logs.
Yep. This is a new item that you haven't seen before. As we went through all of the state's school safety grants this past year or so, one of the requirements was to keep a log of the different emergency drills that we hold. So you're familiar, obviously, with things like fire drills, et cetera. We also have drills for the Alice drills. This is the kind of active shooter type drills. Unfortunately, we need to do those today.
Alice
and then
stand for
hold.
something?
What's
Does
that?
Alice stand for something?
It stands for.
Or just active shooter?
No, it's.
Alert, lockdown?
Help me out, John. What Alice stands for? I'm blanking out at the moment. It's. Yeah, it's basically it's.
Kurt knows. Kurt's got it.
Kurt's got it.
Kurt's Googling it. No.
Kurt's
Yeah,
Googling?
no, basically what it is. It's
alert.
it's.
Alert lockdown.
There you go. Thank you.
Inform.
Yeah, it's an acronym of basically all the different pieces that go through. So you're alerting of what's going on, you're locking down, you're having information, you either decide that you're going to, I think communication or escape, I think is E. Is that right?
C is count.
Counter, oh, counter, that
Right
means
back to the extension.
if you're now face to face, what do you do to, I think they basically are teaching kids, you throw things and you do other different things. And then exit.
I thought there was an Alice.
Sorry, I apologize. I should have written that out and I couldn't pull it up top of my head. So Alice drills are done throughout the district. We do them with our youngest kids. They actually have a picture book that are read to the younger students that talk about kind of the wolf and some of the different pieces, so that and then with the older students, obviously there's a much more articulated issue with that. But the Alice drills are really your active shooter type of drills. Hold drills are where you are holding kids in their location, closing the doors, but there's no kids moving around. So the places that you'd use those are a hold drill is if we have something happening in the community, usually we'll have like a domestic issue, a search warrant, or something happening a block or so away, we'll often put a hold on the school, and then everybody stays put.
That's like a lockdown.
That's not a lockdown. Alice would be a lockdown. So those are very different things. So a lockdown is the whole Alice, barricade your door, everybody's communicating in that respect. A hold is basically just saying, stay put. But we need to document those drills for the Department of Justice. So you will see this report come back most likely next month or the following month as we finish up the drills with our other 3 schools that weren't able to get them in here today. For tonight, I believe the high school actually had their drill today. So I know I heard that from my daughter over the weekend that was something that was coming. So these are some pieces that are just, unfortunately, we need to do these in schools, but they're a part of, I think, some of the life skills our kids need as they go out into the community. But this log comes before you and does need your action tonight that you have seen it. And as the other schools come forward, we will be bringing those to you as well. And then this is part of our report back to the DOJ.
Motion to approve.
Any other information or discussion that you want? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Moving on to announcements and correspondence.
Correspondence, some good news here tonight. We have the High School Forensics Association has sent us a letter just complimenting our one-act play and Rick Braun for their Critics' Choice Award. I mean, they've had a very, very successful drama program and again are continuing to do well at our State Theater Festival. So just acknowledgement to Mr. Braun and all of the students who are involved in that program.
Was there one other thing?
The mow?
No.
That's under.
A middle school.
Oh,
level
yes, this
project.
was with regards to, I think, the middle school honors band. Trying to pull it up here. There was a thank you note just allowing further use of our facilities and all of our staff who helped to support the middle school honors level project that took place there. And we've hosted, I think, that in the past. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Moving on to the consent agenda. We have many items in there. I guess I just have a question about the census report. I guess my question is, as we are looking at moving, I don't know how firm that is, moving from 5 sections to 4 sections when we have 93 kids already identified in kindergarten. It seems, I kind of look at class size acutely in the fall, and I have a hard time moving to 4 sections when we already have 93. And the same at, well, there were 2 Prairie and Heritage both. And I don't know how firm this is and what kind of, if this actually moves into the budget or just something you got an eye on, but.
If I could speak to that for a minute. So what
Please.
Joan is referencing is we do have in the consent agenda information on the census numbers for our students. You will see the fall of 2019 is included in there, and then I had some notes in your board book. Where this is going to directly involve the school board is next month when the open enrollment numbers are established for grade levels. This is going to be a big factor when you're looking at this in January. The reason why I say that is the number of sections that we outline for kindergarten for next year will directly impact the number of openings that are identified in our policy for open enrollment students. So we have to keep in mind that our policy looks at optimal levels, compares it to projected enrollment, and then opens up any number underneath that. So depending on the number of sections that we put into the calculations in January, it will then result in a corresponding number for open enrollment. So we absolutely will be showing you both ways, but the board will have to make a decision in January regarding open enrollment for incoming kindergarten that will probably look different than what you looked at last January, just by the nature of the 4-year-old enrollment in the 4K program being lower. So the discussion on the number of sections and the number of kids will be coming back next month. So just keep that in mind. There is a very strong connection between the two.
Okay.
And depending on the direction taken by the board in January, that will then feed into the budget process for number of sections and how many students. We do have a very strong correlation. You can look at that in the census report. It's a little deeper in there, between being able to accurately identify kindergarten enrollment compared to enrollment of 4-year-olds in the 4K program. There's a pretty strong comparison between those two numbers, so we can draw conclusions and be very close with where we think we would be. The difference is going to be open enrollment. If you remember last year, we talked about the fact that our 4K numbers were low. We had already approved the open enrollment slots, and upon reviewing with the DPI, we could not go back and fill in any additional spots. Now we know that has a lower class size than the other ones, and there will be an opportunity for the board to decide in January where you see that going. I wish the open enrollment process gave us a little bit more time, but state law requires that decision to be made in January.
Mark?
So, just to clarify, when we're talking the open enrollment, we're looking at what the optimal number is, not what the cap is.
Right.
So we will not accept above the optimal level.
That's right.
Yep.
But we still have the problem with moving students. We could then push that to the cap because we've allowed
Right.
students to come in.
Yep. And what Mark is referencing is there in the board policy and class sizes, there's a maximum number, there's an optimal level, there's a minimum number, so we've got a range. The open enrollment policy is tied to the optimal level. And when you see the calculations next month, if we plan for 5 sections of kindergarten at Heritage and 5 sections at Prairie, you can start getting a preview of what the math will show you, because the optimal, if you do 20 times 5, will be 100, and you can see we're nowhere near that. So the number of open enrollment spots will be much larger than we've had in the past. We have to follow that pattern according to our open enrollment policy. So the decision won't necessarily be what does the math look like. It's, are we planning for 5 sections or are we not?
Steve, maybe I'm not reading the chart right. In the census numbers for Prairie, for example, 2021, you're anticipating 92 kids?
So what we're looking at, if you look at the Prairie, so we've identified 92 students across the community, but the strong correlation I was referring to is the breakout chart down below with the 76 kids currently in our 4K program. We are expecting probably around 80 students at Prairie in kindergarten next year. So we have a chart, if we scroll to the end of it, Rebecca, if you wouldn't mind going to the end, where we calculate the differences between, you want to just go up one more slide, or a little bit higher, Rebecca, right there. We calculate the differences between the 4K count and the kindergarten count. So last year at Prairie, it was within 4. So you could take the 76, add 4, and get to 80.
So what about those 17 kids not in 4K but in our district?
They'll probably be in 4K next year.
Oh, so
So
they're,
they're making a
they
decision.
held them,
Yes.
oh, okay, I didn't read that. I thought we were gonna be servicing 94 kids and you wanted to
Yeah.
put them in 4
Yes.
sections, and I wasn't very happy about
Yes,
that.
yes. So
I
hence,
get it.
hence the question.
Yeah, I get it.
If we have 4 sections identified in Prairie, and we've identified 76 students in the 4K program, with the optimal class size, we would be identifying 4
Yeah,
open enrollment spots.
yeah,
If we have 5 sections, we would be identifying 24. That would be a very large number of open enrollment students in
yeah,
kindergarten.
yeah, okay.
So you have to keep in mind the 4 versus the 5,
Okay,
and then the connection to open enrollment and what you'll see next month.
okay. Okay, that helps me a lot, thank you. Did you have a question, David?
On your $5,000 transactions,
Yes.
that was, I would guess this would be the point where it's getting approved anyway. I had 2 things. One, the consulting fees for MD Rolfers Consulting.
Yep.
Could we have more of a description than just consulting fees?
Yep.
That doesn't really tell us what it was about. But then going back to the Energage employee survey, we're doing an employee survey. Did I miss that?
We
Or
did, that
was
was
that
something
wrong?
that Brian did as a baseline as he came in. He did a survey with all of our staff, and it was really to get feedback on our culture, climate, what people thought about working here, and some of the feedback pieces. So he's
Oh,
been,
so that was already done at the beginning of the school
we did it at the beginning of the year. So Brian did that as a baseline of information as he was coming into the HR role.
Did we ever see that?
No, he's
I'd
just,
be interested in seeing that.
Actually,
I can
it
just
was
get it.
brought
It's-
up at a listening session,
yeah.
I think at intermediate, they,
Yeah, and Brian's just getting all the results from that, and he's kind of meeting with all the buildings and administrators, so that certainly can be a piece for some of that to come back through here. Yep.
okay,
I guess one of the things I'd like to mention is put a shout out to, Moe's Martial Arts and
Yeah.
Yvonne Ziegler, for really supporting our students and supporting.
Absolutely.
I think that's important, that we do that shout out.
Well, then we should go see his movie.
I give Brian credit because those aren't schools his kids go to.
Right.
Either.
No.
They
yeah,
are.
yeah, that's,
So,
it's
there.
very
Just
nice.
a shout out to people and all the other people that have donated over the year.
Okay, so we discussed a few items, but we still have to approve consent agendas, and you can approve it all or pull anything out at this point, and
Motion
then I need a
to
motion.
approve the consent agenda.
The whole thing,
Second.
the whole thing. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Perfect.
You got 9 minutes.
9 minutes. We got board business, convention. Rebecca, do you need anything from people? Yeah, probably registration
If you're planning
forms.
on going, if you could fill out the registration form that's attached to the agenda, that way it makes it easier if you have any pre-conference things you want to go to, or any special meals or dietary or anything like that.
And you need that really
I need
soon.
that, I would like that tonight, or let's say Wednesday at the latest.
Okay.
Print it out.
We can print it out.
Deadlines.
I have a copy in my folder, so after the meeting I'll print out. If you tell me you want it, I will print it.
Okay. Future, any legislative update?
Not tonight, no.
Okay, so future meetings and agenda.
Just, we already have a policy committee set for the 16th at 4:30. That will be at Heritage as our location, because following that, we have the Board of Education will be meeting at Heritage at 5:30 on the 16th. We already have a curriculum meeting set for the 17th at 3:30. The meeting that we need to schedule tonight is a budget committee, and I'm looking at either the January 6th, 7th, or 9th. So one of those you prefer at all, Steve? So budget committee is Mark, Julie, Dave, and January 6th, 7th, or 9th.
Do we want to do it after the tour, or is that going to be a long night?
Oh, that, yeah, probably not, probably don't want to do it. Could we do it after that?
I can't do the night.
Okay, do you want to pair it around we could do it on the 6th after the middle school, high school tour?
How long is the budget meeting, you think?
An hour.
Why don't we do it before the tour?
Didn't know if you could get there.
Yeah, do it at 4
The
o'clock?
tour's not
Special
till
meeting starts
5:30.
at 5.
I can get there at 4.
Is
Doesn't
that
it?
at 5?
Or at 5.
Okay.
Is that 5 o'clock? Can we start at 4 on the 6th? Does that work for you, Julie?
Sure, I forgot to bring my other calendar, but I don't think I have anything.
We can meet at the middle school.
Yeah, we'll just do it at the middle school. What's that?
I'll arrange your room.
All right. Yep, so 4 PM at the middle school for budget. And we'll do that on the 6th. That'd be great. That's all I need.
Okay, and none of those are, do we have all the special meetings?
I think we already approved those.
Scheduled. So, I think we're, motion to adjourn, somebody.
Motion to adjourn. I'm looking 6 minutes.
Early.
David's waiting. Anybody want a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
I think you owe me something.
You said
Who wanted one
9:20.
of these forms?
I would like one.
I would each
I want one.
I said 9:20. I'm so close. I
Citations,
just want to do that.
lobster,
So
king
really, that
crab,
was on like.
shrimp,
Oh. You know, I really like having committees
mussels.
first.
Like what?
I like having committees first. On our agenda. Oh, thank you.
I was wondering, when did you change that? Did that
Putting
just?
committees first. No, this has been our second.
I think it would be hindered more if we
Second or
didn't.
third month.
You betcha. Living the dream, living the dream.
No, if you want to get together through those results, because there's a lot there. I mean, I don't know, challenges there. We got like an 80% response rate, you're about 5, which is great. But there's, you know, depending how much time you spend on it, more than probably what you're treating.